You became, I wouldn't say overnight, but almost overnight, a formidable figure with Wild Swan. Your book, Wild Swan, has sold millions and millions of copies and been translated into many languages. And that really defined your stature as a writer. Were you surprised when it became so successful?
You know, when it first came out, I didn't, I wasn't thinking about whether this book was going to be successful or not. And the reason was that I wrote the book as a result of my mother coming to London to stay with me in 1988. That was 10 years after I came to Britain. And you know, for the first time, my mother told me the stories of her life and the stories of my grandmother. And once she started, she couldn't stop. She stayed with me for 6 months, and she talked every day. And she left me 60 hours of tape recordings. And that's how I started. And when the book was finished, when I was beginning to worry about whether it would be a success, and my mother wrote and said the book might not be a success and people might not pay attention to it, but I was not to worry because she could feel that writing the book had brought us closer together.
You managed to encapsulate a very closely knitted period of China that encapsulated the imperial China, the Mao era, and of course afterwards. You were actually writing it as Tiananmen Square unfolded. Did you feel you had to change anything?
Actually, I was in China when Tiananmen was building up in 1989. Yeah. I was in China traveling in Beijing, actually, and other places, and Chengdu, of course, researching wild swans. You know, from my point of view, I was just writing a book about the history of my family, about the fate of these 3 women, my grandmother, my mother, and myself. But of course, we can't escape politics in China. And the history of China was always in the back of my mind. I was aware that I was also at the same time writing about the history of China in the 20th century.
But how about Mao? That's as political as you can get. Now, what gave you the idea initially of writing this monster biography?
The thing is, after Wild Swans was published, and I was beginning to think about writing another book, Mao was obviously the obvious subject. He dominated my early life. I saw him turning the lives of 1/4 of the world's population upside down. And yet I felt the world knew astonishingly little about him. And I wanted to find out more about him. And that's how I started writing. You know, Jung, I wrote the book with Jung, my husband. It took us 12 years to research, yes, but those were the most riveting years of my life because we caught a window of opening, of opportunity. In the 1990s, the Russian archives were open, and a lot of them have been closed, and that was an absolute treasure trove because Russia, as you know, is practically on every page of our Mao biography. And then in China, I managed to get a lot of documents, and some archives were open. And also a lot of Mao's contemporaries were still alive. So we interviewed, you know, Mao's family, relatives, friends, colleagues, widows of colleagues, the staff serving Mao, and also Mao's friends, two going back to 1918. And one particular person was the first Communist Party member that Mao introduced into the party. So they went really way back. They were so helpful. And most of them spoke for the first time. And it was as though they were waiting for somebody to come and ask them questions.
Were you riveted because you had this window of opportunity, or were you riveted by the things you heard and found?
I think both. We were riveted because we got to see so many historical figures. We interviewed many presidents, prime ministers, foreign ministers, heads of communist parties and Maoist parties, not to mention these figures I talked about in China.
When you finished the book and you published it, obviously with a sigh of relief and so forth, were you also happy with its reception?
We had wonderful reviews in the sort of mainstream press. We were also attacked by a lot of China academics. And my view is, I think a lot of them got interested in China in the 1960s, and they were enamored with the Cultural Revolution and with Mao, and they didn't want to see their kind of lifelong illusion being shattered. And of course, there was a lot of jealousy. We discovered all these things they didn't know. I mean, all that's par for the course.
You must regard Hong Kong as a very special place as an author who is critical about certain aspects of China that Chinese on the mainland might feel either jealous about or are prejudiced.
Yes, I mean, Chinese tourists now go to Hong Kong and Taiwan to buy banned books. Our Chinese edition have sold many, many copies. Many have gone into China and have created such an impact. I mean, it's absolutely riveting on the Chinese web, and the people have picked up a lot of things that we were the first to say. I mean, for example, the reason for the famine, for nearly around 40 million deaths between 1958 and 1961, and the reason had never been explained until, if I may say, us, because Mao was exporting food to Russia and to Eastern Europe to buy a whole range of military factory industries and nuclear technology and equipment and the missiles and so on. And he exported food to pay for these purchases. And that point has been picked up by so many, people in China.
So your advice to any aspiring biographies: do your homework, because ultimately it is only the homework that will sustain the veracity and the popularity of your work.
Yes, David, I think do your homework, particularly go to primary sources.
Have you ever thought of doing a fiction? Facts is stranger than fiction.
Yes, facts is stranger, definitely. And also I get enormous pleasure to get to the bottom of truth.
Well, at the Hong Kong Art Fair Forum, we will have two biographers. I mean, you, of course, with Wild Swan, Mao, and then Cixi and William Shawcross on his subjects, and then we have a novelist. So we hope to balance things out. But we are looking forward enormously.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you.